There is a bone in the Natural History Museum in Washington that is longer than most people are tall. It is the femur of Tyrannosaurus rex, and it sits in a glass case under cool white light. And if you stand close enough to it, you can see the texture of the original cortical surface preserved after 66 million years in the ground. The faint ridges where muscle once anchored. The slight flare at the proximal head where ligament and tendon connected a leg the size of a tree trunk to a hip built to carry 6 tons of living animal. And if you stand there long enough to stop looking at it as an exhibit and start looking at it as a thing that existed inside a living body, something begins to happen. Something quiet and slightly vertiginous. You begin to feel, not just think, but feel the weight of time pressing against the present. You begin to understand that this bone is not old in the way that old furniture is old, or old in the way that ancient cities are old. It is old in a way that makes the entire history of civilization, every war, every empire, every cathedral and parliament and poem look like a thin film of frost on the surface of something vast and cold and deep beyond comprehension. And then you find yourself asking a question you were not entirely prepared to ask. What if it had not ended? What if the asteroid had missed? What if, on a morning 66 million years ago, the angle of approach had been slightly different, the trajectory a fraction of a degree higher or lower, and the 9-mile wide rock that punched through the atmosphere above what is now the Gulf of Mexico had instead sailed past the Earth and continued its long loop around the sun, unremarkable, unwitnessed, carrying its catastrophe with it into the void? What if the Chicxulub impactor, the bolide that ended the Cretaceous period and killed 3/4 of all species on the planet, including every last non-avian dinosaur, had simply not arrived? What would 66 million years of unbroken dinosaur evolution have produced? What would the world look like right now, in the age that would never have been called the Cenozoic, if Tyrannosaurus rex and its kin had continued to walk and hunt and evolve all the way to the present? That is the question we are going to sit with tonight. Not in the way that science fiction usually sits with it, because science fiction tends to want monsters, tends to reach for the dramatic and the terrifying. We are going to sit with it the way evolutionary biology would sit with it, the way paleontology would sit with it. Slowly, carefully, with attention to what the fossil record actually tells us about how these animals lived and moved and thought and changed. We are going to take what we know and we are going to follow it forward through 66 million years of imagined time, letting the real principles of evolution and ecology shape the story rather than our fear of large teeth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I am always curious to see how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights if you have not already. Take a deep breath and let the modern world fade away. Because we need to go back first, before we can go forward. We need to go back to the world as it actually was, 66 million years ago, and understand it clearly, in its full strangeness and its full ecological logic, before we can ask what might have grown from it. And that world was stranger than most people realize. It was stranger and more alive and more complex than the movie versions, which tend to reduce it to a series of confrontations between large animals in a perpetual late afternoon of swampy green light. The real Late Cretaceous was a world of extraordinary ecological sophistication, a world that had been running for more than 150 million years by that point, a world in which the dinosaurs had evolved into roles and forms and behaviors that we are still only beginning to understand. Close your eyes for a moment, if they are not already closed. Let the present soften. Let the room you are in dissolve slowly, the walls and the ceiling, and the familiar weight of your own familiar life becoming lighter and less insistent. We are going back 66 million years, to a planet that is recognizably the same planet, the same continents though arranged differently, the same ocean basins though shallower in places, the same star warming the same blue world, but the life on that planet is different in ways that take a moment to absorb. The air is warm. Warmer than today? Significantly warmer, because the planet is in a long greenhouse phase and the polar ice caps are thin or absent depending on the season and the latitude. The equatorial regions are hot and wet, dense with vegetation, laced with rivers. The mid-latitudes, where much of the most famous Cretaceous fauna lived, are subtropical and seasonal, crossed by floodplains and river deltas, dotted with forests of conifers and cycads, and, increasingly, the new and revolutionary flowering plants that have been spreading across the world for tens of millions of years. The angiosperms, as botanists call the flowering plants, are still a relatively recent innovation in geological terms, and they are still in the process of diversifying and filling ecological niches. But they have already begun to change the world, producing new kinds of food and new kinds of habitats, and new kinds of insects to pollinate them, insects that in turn become food for new kinds of small animals. The sky is full of pterosaurs, the great flying reptiles that have been patrolling the air since the Triassic, and birds, true birds descended from small theropod dinosaurs, which have been diversifying since the Jurassic, and by the Late Cretaceous are already numerous and varied. The seas are ruled by mosasaurs, enormous lizard relatives that fill the ecological role that large sharks and killer whales fill today, and by plesiosaurs with their long necks and their strange four-flipper propulsion system. The freshwater rivers and swamps are full of crocodilians, ancient and conservative, looking more or less as they look today, waiting out the changes above them with the patient indifference of a lineage that has outlasted everything. And at the apex of this web, in the Hell Creek and Lance Creek formations of what is now the western interior of North America, there is Tyrannosaurus rex. And yet the name is not quite right either, because Tyrannosaurus rex was not a lizard in any meaningful sense. It was a bird, or rather it was the closest relative of birds that most people would not recognize as such. By the Late Cretaceous, the evolutionary distance between T-Rex and modern birds was significant but not as vast as the popular imagination tends to assume. Tyrannosaurus rex was a coelurosaur, a member of the same broad evolutionary group that includes the small feathered theropods that gave rise to birds. Its closest relatives within the Tyrannosaur family include animals like D. long, a small early Cretaceous tyrannosaur from China that was found with clear evidence of filamentous protofeathers covering much of its body. Whether Tyrannosaurus rex itself bore feathers is debated. The skin impressions found in association with some T-Rex remains show a pebbly, scaly texture on the flanks and tail, which suggests that large adults may have had largely naked skin on much of the body, possibly as a thermoregulatory adaptation to their enormous size, but the possibility of feathering on the head, neck, or dorsal surface cannot be excluded, and juvenile T-Rex may well have been fuzzier and more obviously bird-like than the adults. This matters enormously for what comes next, because feathers are not just insulation. Feathers in the coelurosaur lineage were the substrate from which flight eventually evolved, yes, but they were also display structures. They were communication tools. They were the canvas on which natural selection painted signals of health and fitness, and identity. And if Tyrannosaurus rex retained feathers in any part of its body, if the adults were even partially feathered on the neck or the back or around the face, then we are already dealing with an animal that was more cognitively and socially complex than the image of a purely mechanical killing machine allows. An animal with display structures is an animal with an audience. An animal with an audience is an animal with a social life. All of this matters because we are about to imagine 66 million years of continued evolution for an animal that was already, at the moment of the asteroid's arrival, considerably more complex and more cognitively capable than the popular image suggests. And complexity in evolution tends to compound. Intelligence tends to build on itself. Social behavior tends to generate selection pressure for more social behavior, which generates selection pressure for better communication, which generates selection pressure for larger and more flexible brains, which generates the capacity for learning and problem solving, which opens new ecological possibilities, which in turn drives further cognitive and behavioral change. The trajectory, once it begins, has a momentum of its own. But before we follow that trajectory forward, we need to understand one more thing about the late Cretaceous world. Because the question is not just what would have happened to Tyrannosaurus rex in isolation. The question is, what would have happened to the entire ecosystem? Because ecosystems are not collections of independent animals, they are webs of interdependence, each species shaping and being shaped by every other species it interacts with. Predator and prey co-evolving in a long dance of adaptation and counter-adaptation, herbivore and plant locked in their own ancient negotiation. If the asteroid had missed, the entire web would have continued, and the trajectory of Tyrannosaurus rex would have been shaped by the trajectory of every other animal and plant in the system. Consider the herbivores first. The hadrosaurs and the ceratopsians were not passive prey. They were large, numerous, and by the late Cretaceous, anatomically sophisticated. The hadrosaurs had dental batteries of extraordinary complexity, capable of processing tough vegetation that most other animals could not eat. The crested hadrosaurs, animals like Parasaurolophus, with its dramatic backward-sweeping hollow crest, almost certainly used the crest as a resonating chamber for vocalizations. We have modeled the acoustic properties of Parasaurolophus crests, and the results suggest sounds in the low-frequency range, deep booming calls that would have carried across open floodplains over considerable distances. These were animals communicating. These were animals with social complexity of their own. The ceratopsians, the horned and frilled dinosaurs, are even more interesting from a behavioral perspective. The enormous variation in horn arrangement and frill shape within the ceratopsian family, variation that goes well beyond what would be needed purely for defense, strongly suggests that these structures were primarily visual signals, display organs shaped by sexual selection and social competition, analogous to the antlers of deer or the manes of lions. Animals with complex display structures tend to have complex social lives, because the displays are only meaningful if there are other members of the same species who can read and respond to them. Ceratopsians were probably living in complex social groups with dominance hierarchies and competitive rituals, animals whose horns and frills were the record of millions of years of evolution, driven by the preferences and the threat assessments of other ceratopsians. And these herbivores were the prey base that Tyrannosaurus rex depended on, which means that the evolutionary pressure on T-Rex to become a more effective hunter was being driven not by some abstract optimization process, but by the specific defenses and behaviors and social intelligence of the animals it was trying to catch and kill. Prey that communicates well is harder to stalk. Prey that lives in groups can detect predators earlier and can sometimes defend collectively. Prey with good sensory systems requires a predator with equally good or better sensory systems to match. The competition between predator and prey is an arms race, and arms races drive innovation on both sides. Let that sit for a moment, because what it means is that if the Cretaceous had continued, if the asteroid had missed, the evolutionary pressure on the Tyrannosaur lineage was not going to relax. It was going to intensify. The prey was getting better. The prey was getting smarter, more communicative, more socially organized, and that pressure would have pushed the tyrannosaurs to match it. Now let us step forward. Not all the way to the present, not yet. Let us step forward 5 million years first, into a world that has diverged from our own, but is still recognizable as the world that the late Cretaceous was becoming. 5 million years is a long time in evolutionary terms. It is enough time for significant anatomical change. It is enough time for new species to arise and old ones to go extinct. It is enough time for ecosystems to shift and reorganize. But it is not so long that the thread connecting the new world to the old one has become invisible. 5 million years after the non-extinction, the world is still warm. The Paleocene warming that in our timeline followed the impact event would not occur, because that warming was partly driven by the enormous fires and the injection of carbon into the atmosphere that followed the impact, and partly by the subsequent recovery of vegetation in a world largely cleared of its dominant herbivores. Without the impact, the climate trajectory of the Late Cretaceous continues on its existing path. The planet remains in a greenhouse state. The shallow inland seas that covered much of the interior of North America in the Late Cretaceous may have persisted somewhat longer before their gradual withdrawal, though the tectonic forces driving continental elevation and sea level change would have continued on their own schedule regardless of the biological events at the surface. The vegetation is changing, the angiosperms, the flowering plants, continue their expansion. In our timeline, this expansion accelerated somewhat after the KPG extinction, because the removal of large herbivores temporarily changed the selective pressures on plant communities, but in the continued Cretaceous world, the angiosperms keep diversifying simply because diversification is what successful lineages do, and the angiosperms are supremely successful. New fruit types are evolving. New seed dispersal strategies are emerging. New mutualisms between plants and insects, and, increasingly, between plants and small dinosaurs that eat fruit and inadvertently transport seeds, are becoming established. The world is becoming more flowery, more fruited, more complex in its botanical architecture. And in this changing world, the dinosaurs are changing with it. The hadrosaurs are diversifying. The crested forms are becoming more elaborate. Their crests larger, their acoustic range broader, their social communication more sophisticated. Some lineages are moving into new dietary niches, becoming more selective feeders, more capable of processing the new flowering plant foods that are now proliferating. The ceratopsians are similarly diversifying, their horn and frill arrangements becoming more varied, their geographic range expanding as vegetation patterns shift. The ankylosaurs are becoming more heavily armored. The evolutionary response to increasingly effective predators. The small maniraptorans, the feathered relatives of birds that were already numerous in the Late Cretaceous, are proliferating into every available niche, filling the small and medium vertebrate roles that in our timeline were filled by early mammals. And the tyrannosaurs. 5 million years on, the tyrannosaur lineage has not remained static. The pressure from increasingly sophisticated prey has begun to do its work. The olfactory system remains dominant, but the visual system is improving. Some lineages show evidence, in our imagined fossil record, of slightly increased cranial capacity, of orbital arrangements that suggest improved color vision. The arms, those famous tiny forearms, are becoming even more vestigial in some lineages, their mass being reallocated by selection toward the legs and the skull. But in other lineages, something different is beginning. A retention of slightly longer arms with more flexible wrists. A subtle change in the hand, a change that in isolation looks like nothing much, but that in hindsight is the beginning of something. Let us keep going. Let us step forward not 5 million years, but 20 million years. 20 million years into the imagined continuation of the Mesozoic. 20 million years is deep time even by the standards of the geological record. It is as far from the Late Cretaceous as the Late Cretaceous is from the Early Cretaceous. It is a span of time in which, in our own timeline, the entire primate order arose and diversified into dozens of lineages, in which the first whales returned to the sea from their land mammal ancestors, in which the landscapes of every continent were rearranged by the slow but inexorable movement of the tectonic plates, 20 million years of evolution does not leave the world unrecognizable, but it leaves it profoundly changed. In this world, the one that was never interrupted by the impact, the Mesozoic continues. The Cretaceous transitions into something that has no name in our geological lexicon because we never lived it. A warm, complex, dinosaur-dominated world that keeps running on the same evolutionary rails, but in directions our Cenozoic adapted imaginations struggle to follow. The continents are drifting. North America and Europe are separating further. India has not yet collided with Asia, and the Tethys Sea still separates them, though its closure is beginning. South America is an island continent, isolated from North America, evolving its own peculiar fauna in the same splendid isolation that it maintained in our timeline until the formation of the Isthmus of Panama some 3.5 million years ago in the world we know. The climate is shifting towards slightly cooler conditions, because the same long-term Cenozoic cooling trend that eventually led to the ice ages of our own timeline was driven largely by tectonic processes that the asteroid had no effect on. The collision of India with Asia would eventually produce the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau, and the Tibetan Plateau would eventually alter global atmospheric circulation and drive planetary cooling. These processes unfold on their own timescale regardless of whether dinosaurs or mammals are the dominant land vertebrates. The world, in 20 million years, is slightly cooler than the peak of the Late Cretaceous greenhouse, more seasonal in the temperate zones, with real winters in the higher latitudes. And into those cooler high latitudes, the dinosaurs are following the vegetation. Because dinosaurs, unlike the traditional imagining of them as sluggish, cold weather reverse reptiles, were already pushing into high latitude environments in the Late Cretaceous. We know this from fossil sites in Alaska, where hadrosaurs and small theropods have been found at paleolatitudes well above 60 degrees north, latitudes that experienced months of polar darkness each year. These animals were not migrants in every case, because the evidence suggests that some of them wintered in place. They were endotherms, or something very close to it, animals that generated and regulated their own body heat through metabolic activity, and they were capable of surviving in environments that would have been lethal to a true ectotherm. 20 million years of continued evolution in the context of a gradually cooling climate produces dinosaurs that are even better adapted to cold conditions. The selection pressure for better insulation intensifies in the higher latitudes, and feathers, which are extraordinarily efficient insulators, spread. The Tyrannosaur lineage in the north shows increasingly dense feathering. Some lineages are developing down-like inner layers beneath longer display feathers, exactly the kind of stratified insulation that modern birds use. These are big animals, some of them as large as the original Tyrannosaurus rex, now living in seasonal temperate forests of conifers and increasingly of deciduous angiosperms, hunting prey that is itself becoming larger-bodied and denser-coated in response to the cold. The hadrosaurs of the north are larger. Bergmann's rule, the ecological observation that within a lineage, populations in colder climates tend toward larger body size because a larger body has a more favorable surface area to volume ratio for heat retention, is doing its work over millions of years. The northern hadrosaurs are not just slightly larger than their southern relatives, they are significantly larger. Some lineages are approaching the size of the great Titanosaur sauropods of the Jurassic, and their crests have become enormous, acoustic structures of impressive size, capable of producing sounds that carry across the vast boreal forests, in the same way that the calls of moose and elk carry across northern forests today. And the tyrannosaurs that hunt them are larger still. In the cold north, where prey is large and the winters are long and hunting success cannot be guaranteed every day, the selective pressure is toward animals that can take large prey reliably, store energy efficiently, and fast for extended periods when prey is scarce. Big bodies do all of these things better than small ones. The Tyrannosaur lineage in the north is pushing towards sizes beyond the original T-Rex. Not dramatically beyond, because there are physical limits to how large a biped can grow before the structural mechanics of locomotion become untenable, but meaningfully beyond. 14 meters, perhaps 15 in the largest individuals, animals whose footfalls you would feel in the ground before you heard them with your ears. But something more interesting than mere size is happening. The Tyrannosaur brain is growing, not explosively, not in a single dramatic leap, but steadily, generation by generation, in the way that brains grow when the environment consistently rewards the individuals who can solve problems that other individuals cannot. The problem in question is prey, specifically prey that is increasingly good at not being eaten. The hadrosaurs, if you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. The hadrosaurs of 20 million years after the survival event are not the hadrosaurs of the Late Cretaceous. They have been under continuous selection pressure from increasingly capable predators for 20 million years. And that pressure has produced animals with better sensory systems, better social organization, and, crucially, better communication. The crests are larger because larger crests produce richer acoustic signals, and richer acoustic signals allow for more complex communication, and more complex communication allows for better coordination of group defense. A hadrosaur herd in this world is not a simple aggregation. It is something closer to a social unit, with individuals communicating their behavioral states to one another, with something like sentinel behavior emerging, with coordinated responses to predator detection that involve the whole herd moving as a unit rather than each individual bolting in its own direction. Hunting a herd animal that behaves in this way requires more than speed and strength. It requires planning. It requires the capacity to model the prey's likely behavior, to anticipate where the herd will move, to recognize individual vulnerabilities and separate them from the group's protection. These cognitive demands are exactly the selection pressure that drives brain growth in predators. We see this in our own world, in the intelligence of wolves, of killer whales, of chimpanzees, all animals that hunt socially complex prey, or that live in complex social groups themselves. Intelligence is expensive, metabolically speaking, and natural selection does not pay that cost without a return on investment. But when the investment pays off in improved hunting success, the cost is worth it. The tyrannosaurs of 20 million years post-survival are not clever in the way that humans are clever. They are not making tools or building structures or communicating through arbitrary symbolic language. They are clever in the way that wolves are clever, in the way that large corvids are clever, in the way that octopuses are clever. They are clever in the service of survival, with spatial memory good enough to hold a hunting territory in mind, with the capacity to learn from experience and to adjust hunting strategies based on past outcomes, with some degree of individual recognition of both prey animals and other members of their own species. They are animals with inner lives that, while alien to us, are more than the purely reactive, stimulus response machinery that the old image of dinosaurs as mindless reptiles implied. And their social lives are becoming more complex. The evidence from trackways in this imagined world, if we could read them, would show multiple tyrannosaurs moving together in ways that suggest coordinated activity. Not the rigid pack behavior of wolves perhaps, but something looser and more opportunistic. Animals that recognize the advantage of proximity when hunting large prey, that share territory as family groups, that have the capacity to communicate intention and emotional state through posture and vocalization. The vocalizations themselves are diversifying. 20 million years of social selection has pushed the acoustic range of the tyrannosaur vocal system well beyond what the original T-Rex was capable of. Low-frequency booms carry across vast distances for long-range communication. Higher-frequency calls, shorter and more complex, function at close range for immediate social coordination. Let us pause here in this world 20 million years removed from our familiar Late Cretaceous and take stock of what has accumulated. The world is warmer than ours, but cooling. The continents are still mostly in Cretaceous positions, but beginning to move toward their modern arrangement. The dominant large animals on land are still dinosaurs, but they are not the same dinosaurs that Barnum Brown and William Matthew pulled from the Hell Creek Formation at the dawn of the 20th century. They are the descendants of those animals, changed by 20 million years of evolution in ways that are continuous with their ancestors, but that reflect the accumulated pressure of a changing world. The tyrannosaurs are larger, smarter, more feathered, more socially complex. The hadrosaurs are larger, more acoustically sophisticated, more coordinated in their group behavior. The ceratopsians have diversified into a dozen new forms. The small feathered maniraptorans are everywhere, filling every gap in the ecological structure that the larger animals leave open. And somewhere in that teeming world, something is beginning that will take another 40 million years to become fully legible. Something in the Tyrannosaur lineage, a slight but persistent trend in cranial anatomy, a forebrain that is, year by year, generation by generation, a fraction larger than it needs to be just for the immediate demands of hunting and survival. Intelligence at the margins, cognitive capacity that exceeds the minimum required, and that excess, that small surplus of neural architecture beyond what the moment demands, is the substrate from which everything extraordinary eventually grows. Now, let us step further. Let us step all the way to 66 million years after the survival event, the present, or rather, the world that would be the present if the present had been allowed to follow a different path. The first thing to understand is that this world would not be a Cretaceous world preserved in amber. 66 million years is enough time for extraordinary change. In our timeline, 66 million years of mammal evolution transformed small, nocturnal, insectivorous creatures the size of shrews into elephants and whales and horses and bats and primates and humans. 66 million years of evolution can do anything, given sufficient selection pressure and sufficient ecological opportunity. So the world of 66 million years post-survival is not the Late Cretaceous. It is a world as far from the Late Cretaceous as our world is, only it arrived here by a different path. The climate has changed. The long Cenozoic cooling trend, driven by tectonic processes that were independent of the biological events at the surface, has proceeded in this world much as it proceeded in ours. The Tethys Sea has closed as Africa and India pushed northward. The Himalayas exist. The Antarctic ice sheet has formed as it began to form in our timeline around 34 million years ago, when the opening of the Drake Passage between South America and Antarctica allowed the Antarctic circumpolar current to develop, thermally isolating the southern continent. The ice ages of the Pleistocene have come and gone, driven by the same Milankovitch cycles of orbital variation that drove them in our timeline, because orbital mechanics do not care what is living on the surface of the planet. The world of the present in this alternate history has experienced the same broad strokes of climate change that our world has experienced. Glacial advances and retreats, sea level fluctuations, the drying of grasslands, the expansion of forests during warm interglacials and their contraction during glacials, the formation of the Sahara, the drying of Central Asia. All of these climatic events have imposed the same selective pressures on life in this world that they imposed on life in ours, and evolution has responded to those pressures. The dinosaurs have responded. The question is how? The large herbivores, the descendants of the hadrosaurs and ceratopsians and remaining sauropod lineages, have continued to evolve under the combined pressures of climate change, changing vegetation, and predator pressure. Some lineages have become more specialized, some have become more generalist. The ceratopsians, with their flexible dietary habits and their complex social structures, have diversified enormously. There are now dozens of ceratopsian species, filling the roles that deer and antelope and wild horses fill in our world. Medium to large herbivores of the open grasslands and forest edges. Animals of extraordinary horn and frill variety. each species recognizable to the others of its kind through the specific geometry of its facial display structures. Because yes, in this world there are grasslands. The expansion of grasses, C4 photosynthesis plants that are extraordinarily efficient in open, high-light environments, is as significant a botanical revolution in this world as it was in ours, for the same reasons. Grasses began diversifying in the Eocene in our timeline, and the same climatic conditions that drove that diversification would drive it in the parallel world. Open grasslands spreading across the interiors of continents during cooler, drier climatic phases. And the dinosaurs, like the mammals of our world, are following the grass. The hadrosaur descendants on the grasslands are running animals, long-legged, fast, with deep chests and efficient respiratory systems. They fill the ecological role of wildebeest and zebra and springbok in our world. Vast herds moving across the plains in seasonal migrations, following the rains and the fresh growth, alert and fast and social, their acoustic communication so sophisticated that it constitutes something very close to what we would have to call language if we were observing it in a mammal. Calls that identify individuals, calls that communicate specific threat types, the kind of information that vervet monkeys convey through their predator-specific alarm calls in the African savanna today. Calls that coordinate the movements of a herd of tens of thousands of animals with something approaching collective intelligence. And hunting these herds, the predators, the Tyrannosaur descendants. 66 million years of continued evolution from Tyrannosaurus rex has produced a lineage that is, by the present of this alternate world, deeply and fascinatingly changed. The enormous apex predator body plan, the multi-ton biped with the massive skull, persists in some lineages. But it is not the only form that the Tyrannosaur inheritance has taken. Because a lineage under sustained selection pressure for intelligence, for social coordination, for the cognitive ability to hunt increasingly smart and socially complex prey, does not just get bigger and sharper-toothed over 66 million years. It gets more flexible. It gets more varied. It explores the design space of possible body plans and behavioral strategies more thoroughly. Some Tyrannosaur descendants are still very large. The mega-predators of the open plains, hunting the large hadrosaur herds, are animals of 7 or 8 tons, slightly smaller than the original T-Rex because 66 million years of grassland evolution has placed a premium on speed over raw size, and the absolute maximum size for a fast-moving biped has proven, over millions of years, to be somewhat smaller than the original maximum. These animals are feathered, entirely feathered. Large display plumes on the head and along the dorsal line, shorter insulating down beneath, practical coloration on the flanks. They are beautiful in the way that a hunting eagle is beautiful, functional and perfectly integrated, every surface and structure the product of long optimization. But there are smaller Tyrannosaur descendants, much smaller. Because the original Tyrannosaur lineage in the Late Cretaceous already contained species of greatly varying sizes, from the dog-sized Mononychus relatives, to the car-sized adolescent tyrannosaurs, to the enormous adults. And in 66 million years of post-Cretaceous evolution, those smaller body plans have found their own niches and developed their own trajectories. There are medium-sized tyrannosaur descendants, roughly in the size range of a large wolf or a puma, fast and agile and capable of taking prey that the giant hunters cannot efficiently pursue into dense cover. And there are small ones, swift and feathered and bright, filling the ecological roles of large raptorial birds in our world, hunting the small vertebrates of the undergrowth with ferocious efficiency. The diversity of the Tyrannosaur family tree in this world of 66 million years post-survival is something like what we see in the felid family in our world. Cats ranging in size from the 2-kilogram black-footed cat to the 300-kilogram Siberian tiger, all recognizably cats, but enormously varied in their adaptations and their lifestyles. The Tyrannosaur family tree of the alternate present is a similar array of predatory styles and body sizes, connected by deep shared ancestry and by certain structural features that remain recognizable across the whole group. The deep, reinforced skull, the powerful jaws, the biped stance on strong rear legs, the relatively reduced forelimbs in most lineages, though not all, family resemblance persisting across an ocean of evolutionary time. And then there is the branch that the story has been quietly building toward for the last 20 minutes of our imagined geological history. The branch that represents the answer to the most profound version of the question we are asking tonight. Because when we ask what would have happened if the tyrannosaurs had survived, we are not just asking about teeth and body size and ecological niches. We are asking whether, given enough time and the right selection pressures, something like intelligence, something like culture, something like awareness might have emerged in a lineage descended from Tyrannosaurus rex. And the answer, it turns out, depends on what we mean by each of those words. These animals have not invented writing. They have not built cities. They have not, in any recognizable human sense, created civilization. But they are not the unthinking killing machines of the popular imagination either. They are cognitively rich animals in the way that ravens and elephants and great apes are cognitively rich animals, animals with genuine inner lives, with the capacity for something very close to play and something very close to grief, and something very close to the kind of intentional planning that we, in our own arrogance, tend to think of as uniquely human. Whether they would have gone further given more time is perhaps the deepest question of all. And it is a question worth sitting with, because the answer depends partly on contingency, on the specific pressures that the specific environmental history of this alternate world would have brought to bear on this specific lineage, and partly on something more fundamental. The question of whether intelligence of the kind that eventually produces language and technology and civilizations of stone and steel is an inevitable endpoint of sufficiently complex social evolution, or whether it requires a specific set of circumstances so improbable that it has, in the history of our Earth, occurred only once. We do not know the answer to this question even in our own world. The evolution of human-level intelligence and language and technology is a sample size of one, and you cannot derive statistical regularities from a single data point. The universe might be full of worlds on which intelligence has emerged in lineages as different from ours as our imagined tyrannosaur descendants are different from us. Or intelligence of this kind might be extraordinarily rare, a cosmic accident as contingent and improbable as any other, dependent on a cascade of specific circumstances that almost never align. We do not know. And the honesty of that uncertainty is itself part of the story. What we can say with some confidence is this: the late Cretaceous world was not a dead end. It was not a world waiting to be cleared away so that the mammals could finally have their turn. It was a world of extraordinary biological richness and evolutionary sophistication, a world that had been in business for over 150 million years, and that had developed an ecological and cognitive complexity that we are only beginning to properly appreciate. The animals that lived in it were not primitive. They were not simple. They were, in many ways, more biologically successful than anything that came before or after, having maintained dominance on land for longer than any other vertebrate group in the history of life on this planet. And if the asteroid had missed, that world would have continued. It would have changed, as all worlds change, shaped by climate and tectonics and the endless churn of evolutionary innovation. The specific species we know from the fossil record would not have persisted unchanged for 66 million years. They never do. Evolution works too quickly for that, even when working slowly. But the lineages would have persisted. The ecological roles would have been filled by dinosaur descendants rather than mammal descendants. And the cognitive and behavioral complexity that was already emerging in those lineages in the late Cretaceous would have had 66 million more years to develop. That is an almost incomprehensible span of time to sit with. 66 million years is the entire length of the Cenozoic era, the age of mammals in our world, the time in which everything from the first Paleocene rodents to blue whales to human beings evolved and diversified and filled the world. 66 million years of Tyrannosaur evolution is a canvas whose dimensions beggar imagination. We can sketch the outlines of what might have emerged on it, guided by the principles of evolutionary biology and by the evidence of what the Late Cretaceous world was already producing. But the details are beyond our reach. Too many variables, too many contingencies, too many moments in which the world could have turned one way and turned another instead. And perhaps that is the right place to find ourselves, at the edge of what we can reasonably speculate and the beginning of what we simply cannot know. Because this has always been the nature of deep time, this conversation between what the record tells us and what the imagination tries to fill in around it. Every fossil is a window, small and sometimes cracked and often opaque, into a world that no human being has ever seen. And every bone in every museum case, including that femur in Washington that started us on this journey, is a remnant of a story that ended abruptly and left no one to tell it. But let us go back one more time to the actual science, because the speculation is only meaningful if it is grounded in what we genuinely know, and what we genuinely know about the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary event, the thing that did happen, the extinction that this entire night's journey has been circling around, is more remarkable and more precisely understood than most people realize. And understanding what actually ended the dinosaurs in full scientific detail is the necessary counterweight to everything we have been imagining. It gives the speculation its shape and its limits. The asteroid that struck the Earth 66 million years ago was approximately 12 kilometers in diameter. It was a carbonaceous chondrite, a type of primitive rocky body composed largely of silicate minerals with some carbon compounds, roughly 3 times the average density of the Earth's crust. It entered the atmosphere at roughly 20 kilometers per second, which is about 72,000 kilometers per hour. At that velocity, a 12-kilometer object does not slow down meaningfully in the atmosphere. The atmosphere, relative to an impactor of that mass and speed, is essentially absent. The rock passes through it as though it were not there, and in the fraction of a second that passage takes, the leading face of the asteroid is superheated by atmospheric compression to temperatures of tens of thousands of degrees. But the interior of the body does not have time to respond. The asteroid arrives at the surface essentially intact. The impact site was the shallow carbonate shelf of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, in water perhaps 300 meters deep. The explosion released energy equivalent to roughly 1 billion Hiroshima bombs. The rock beneath the impact site was vaporized. A crater 150 kilometers in diameter began to form within seconds. The entire crust rebounding upward at the center in a momentary peak that rose kilometers above the surrounding surface before collapsing back into a ring structure. The impact melt, rock that had been converted to liquid by the pressure and heat of the impact, sloshed outward and then back, creating the complex ring structure now buried beneath the Gulf of Mexico and the northern tip of the Yucatan. The immediate effects were devastating at local and regional scales. A fireball, a thermal pulse, earthquakes of magnitude 10 or 11 that shook the entire planet. Tsunamis that crossed the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic in hours. But the effects that ended the Cretaceous were not the immediate local devastation. They were the global and sustained consequences that followed. 2 things happened in the hours and days after the impact that set the long-term catastrophe in motion. First, the impact ejected an enormous quantity of material into the atmosphere, including vaporized rock, soot from the fires that ignited across North America and beyond as ejecta rained back down through the atmosphere, and most critically, sulfate aerosols produced by the vaporization of the thick layer of sulfur-rich anhydrite rock at the impact site. The sulfate aerosols spread through the stratosphere within days and circle the entire globe within weeks. Second, the quantity of soot from the global fires was sufficient, combined with the impact debris and the sulfate aerosols, to block a significant fraction of incoming sunlight. The darkness lasted. Not total darkness, but a sustained reduction in the sunlight reaching the surface, a nuclear winter in slow motion, lasting months and persisting in reduced form for perhaps a year or two. The global temperature dropped sharply. The monsoons and weather patterns that the planet's biological systems depended on were disrupted. Most critically, photosynthesis was suppressed. The base of the food chain, the photosynthesizing organisms at the base of every ecosystem, was critically damaged. On land, if you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. On land, plants died. In the oceans, the photosynthetic plankton died. The food chains built on top of those plants, and that plankton collapsed from the bottom up. And then, when the sulfate aerosols cleared and the dust settled and the light returned, the second blow arrived. The enormous quantity of carbon dioxide that had been released by the impact and by the fires, combined with the carbon dioxide that had been stripped from the vaporized carbonate rock at the impact site itself, produced a rapid warming, a greenhouse spike that in some estimates raised global temperatures by several degrees above the already warm pre-impact baseline. The cold shock was followed by a heat shock. A few large land animals survived this double blow. The animals that made it through were the small ones. The ones that could shelter underground or in crevices. The ones that could eat seeds or fungi, or the organic matter of recently dead material, rather than living green plants. The ones whose metabolic needs were modest enough that they could survive on minimal food for extended periods. Crocodilians survived. Turtles survived. Some lizards and snakes survived. Some birds survived. The small granivorous ones that could subsist on the seed bank still present in the soil. And the small mammals survived. The shrew-like and rat-like creatures that had been living in the shadow of the dinosaurs for their entire existence, skulking in the undergrowth, hiding in burrows, eating insects and seeds and whatever they could find, never more than a few centimeters long for most of the Mesozoic, because the dinosaurs occupied all the niches that larger body size would have required. The dinosaurs died. Not just T-Rex. All of the non-avian dinosaurs. Hadrosaurs and ceratopsians and ankylosaurs and sauropods and tyrannosaurs and all the rest, gone within a geological instant. Within perhaps 10,000 to 100,000 years of the impact, which in the geological timescale is less than a breath. 3/4 of all species on the planet went extinct. The Cretaceous ended, and the Paleocene began, and the world that emerged from it was a profoundly different world, quieter and smaller and stranger, populated by the survivors and their descendants. The precision of our understanding of this event has improved enormously in recent decades. The Chicxulub crater was identified in the 1980s by Luis Alvarez and his colleagues, who first proposed the asteroid impact hypothesis based on the globally distributed iridium anomaly at the KPG boundary. Iridium being an element rare in the Earth's crust, but common in meteoritic material. Since then, the crater has been drilled and analyzed in extraordinary detail. The peak ring, the inner ring of uplifted rock that forms a distinctive feature of large impact craters, was drilled during an international scientific expedition between 2016 and 2017, and the results provided a remarkable record of the impact's first minutes. Rock that had been melted and shocked and fractured in a matter of seconds, then partially solidified in hours. A geological record of violence and speed that has no parallel in any other process we know. And we know from that crater with great precision that the impactor hit in the worst possible location. The Yucatan Shelf was unusually rich in sulfur-bearing rocks. Had the asteroid hit in a different location, somewhere in the deep ocean or on a different section of continental crust without those sulfate deposits, the sulfate aerosol loading of the atmosphere would have been dramatically less, and the duration and severity of the cooling would have been significantly reduced. Simulations suggest that if the asteroid had struck in the deep ocean, the extinction event might have been substantially less severe, and many of the large dinosaur lineages might have survived. The location of the strike was, in a very real sense, unlucky in the specific way that mattered most. Different angle, different location, different outcome. This is what paleontologist David Fastovsky and his colleagues have described as the target effect, the amplification of catastrophe by the specific mineralogy of the impact site. And it is a genuine example of how contingency shapes the history of life. The rules of evolution are deterministic in the sense that natural selection reliably favors the better adapted variant. But the context in which those rules operate is subject to random events of enormous consequence. An asteroid strikes. It strikes in a specific place. That specific place happens to have a specific rock type. That rock type amplifies the catastrophe. The dominant life forms of the planet are eliminated. A different set of animals inherits the world, and 66 million years later, one of the inheritors, a small, upright walking, large-brained primate from the African savanna, has the temerity to look at the bones of what was lost and ask, what if it had gone differently? There is a certain vertigo in that question, because that primate, the one asking the question, exists only because of the impact. Mammals were small and marginal for the entire length of the Mesozoic, because the dinosaurs occupied every ecological role that larger body size would have required. Without the extinction event, mammals would almost certainly have remained small and marginal. Without small and marginal mammals that survived the extinction, there would have been no Paleocene radiation, no Eocene diversification, no Oligocene emergence of the primate lineage, no Miocene hominid, no Pliocene Australopithecine, no Pleistocene Homo, no Holocene civilization. The asteroid did not just end the non-avian dinosaurs, it made us. And asking what the world would have been like without the asteroid is, in a very direct sense, asking what the world would have been like without us. Asking what would have replaced us, whether anything would have replaced us. That replacement question is where the science and the speculation converge most interestingly. Because one of the things we know from evolutionary biology is that intelligence is not inevitable. It is not the endpoint of a teleological process that all lineages are inexorably moving toward. In the entire history of life on Earth, over 3.5 billion years of biological evolution, technological civilization has emerged exactly once, in exactly one species, in a geological eye blink of the last few tens of thousands of years. Everything else that ever lived, every trilobite and fern and dinosaur and coelacanth and nautilus and stromatolite, lived and died and evolved and speciated, and went extinct without ever producing anything like the kind of recursive, language-mediated, technology-producing intelligence that sits in the dark right now and thinks about deep time. That is a remarkable fact, and it suggests that the emergence of intelligence of this particular kind is either genuinely improbable, requiring an unusual and unlikely confluence of factors, or it is genuinely inevitable given enough time but requires a very specific kind of evolutionary starting point. The evidence from our own lineage suggests that the starting point matters enormously. Primates evolved in a specific context, in the trees of tropical forests, where three-dimensional navigation and fine manual dexterity and color vision and complex social living all combined to generate selection pressure for the specific suite of cognitive traits that eventually, millions of years later, produced human intelligence. The question is whether the descendants of Tyrannosaurus rex could have arrived at an equivalent confluence of pressures and traits by a different path. The answer, most evolutionary biologists would cautiously say, is maybe. Maybe over 66 million years. maybe under the right circumstances, maybe in a lineage small enough and social enough and behaviorally flexible enough to benefit from the cumulative cognitive advantages of generation on generation learning. Not the giant plains hunters, but perhaps those smaller forest-dwelling, cooperatively hunting descendants we were imagining earlier. Perhaps. The uncertainty is real and important, and not something we should paper over with confident speculation. What we can say with more confidence is this: the Mesozoic did not produce nothing. It did not produce 66 million years of mindless predation and passive grazing. It produced, in the Late Cretaceous, animals of genuine behavioral and cognitive sophistication. It produced the first birds, which in our world have gone on to produce ravens and parrots and corvids of remarkable intelligence, animals capable of tool use, of planning, of something very close to theory of mind. It produced the ancestral crocodilians, which are far more behaviorally sophisticated than their cold-blooded reputation suggests, with parental care and social signaling and long-term spatial memory that continue to surprise researchers. It produced the tyrannosaurs, which were not the lumbering automata of the early 20th century imagination, but were warm-blooded, feathered, potentially social animals with brains that were, by the standards of their time, genuinely impressive. The Mesozoic was not a rehearsal for the real story. It was the real story, running in full, for longer than anything before or since. And if it had been allowed to continue, the real story would have gone on producing real complexity and real diversity and real possibilities, some of which we can guess at and many of which we cannot. Now let us return to something more personal, because this whole night's journey, from the femur in the glass case to the imagined planes of the alternate present, is ultimately a meditation on time, on the scale of time, on what it means to exist in the present moment, knowing that the present moment is embedded in an almost incomprehensibly deep past, and that the future stretches forward equally far, equally dark, equally full of contingent possibilities that no one alive today will ever know. We talk about dinosaurs as though they belong to childhood, as though they are a phase, a stage of development through which the imagination passes before settling into adult concerns. But the reality of them, the scientific reality, is something far beyond what any picture book or theme park can contain. Tyrannosaurus rex lived and hunted, and probably parented, and almost certainly communicated, and definitely died in a world that existed for itself, not as a precursor to ours, not as a stepping stone toward the rise of mammals and the emergence of the human mind. It existed in the same sense that we exist, with the same evolutionary investment in survival and reproduction, with the same relationship to its own present moment, the smell of a floodplain after rain, the sight of a hadrosaur herd moving through a stand of conifers, the sound of its own kind calling across a distance. And it is gone, not diminished, not migrated to some other context. Gone. Eliminated by a piece of rock from space that happened to arrive on a specific autumn morning 66 million years ago, at a specific angle and in a specific place. The contingency of it is almost too large to hold. One of the most successful lineages in the history of vertebrate life, 165 million years of dominance on land, ended by an event that had nothing to do with any failure in the animals themselves. They were not outcompeted. They were not replaced by something better. They were erased, along with most of the rest of life on Earth, by an event as random and indifferent as a stone dropped from a great height onto a garden. And from the survivors of that erasure, from the small and the lucky and the underground and the feathered, the world remade itself. The mammals expanded, the birds diversified, the flowering plants continued their revolution, and 66 million years of Cenozoic evolution produced the world we know, with its grasslands and its forests, and its oceans full of cetaceans, and its one species of upright primate who builds cities and writes music and lies in the dark and listens to the deep history of a planet that does not care whether it is heard or not. we are the asteroid's children. Every human being who has ever lived is the beneficiary of a catastrophe that ended something magnificent. The debt we owe to that rock from space is one we can never repay and did not ask to incur. But awareness of it, genuine awareness, the kind that goes past the abstract and settles into the bones, changes something in the way you look at the world, changes something in the way you feel the present moment, this specific moment, which is one of an unbroken chain of moments stretching back to that autumn morning 66 million years ago, and through that morning to the 3.5 billion years of life that preceded it. When you look at a bird, you are looking at a dinosaur. That is not a poetic metaphor or a loose analogy. It is a precise cladistic statement. Birds are the surviving branch of the theropod dinosaur tree. Every sparrow and heron and swift and crow is a living tyrannosauroid, related to T-Rex through an unbroken lineage of breathing, eating, reproducing animals, none of whom knew that they were links in a chain, all of whom simply lived and died and left descendants who did the same. The connection is real. The atoms are real. The evolutionary history is real and documented and can be read in the bones. So the dinosaurs did not entirely disappear. The birds are here. Over 10,000 species of them, filling every aerial niche on the planet, navigating by the stars and the magnetic field, singing songs of extraordinary complexity, migrating thousands of kilometers each year, building nests of remarkable ingenuity, caring for their young with the kind of sustained parental investment that Mesozoic dinosaurs were beginning to develop, and that avian dinosaurs have perfected over 66 million years of continued evolution. The dinosaur story did not end with the asteroid. It merely changed direction. The surviving branch kept growing. But the branch that kept growing was not T-Rex. It was not the tyrannosaurs or the hadrosaurs or the ceratopsians. It was the small, feathered, already partly aerial branch. The one that had already spent tens of millions of years being small and quick and versatile. The one that survived the collapse of the food chains because it was already adapted to a world of small portions and flexible diet. The big animals were gone, and with them went every possible future that their lineages might have produced. That is the loss. That is what the bone in the glass case represents, if you are willing to look at it long enough. Not just the animal that died, but every animal it might have become. Let us go deeper into the biology now, because the speculation only has value when it is built on what we actually know, and what we actually know about tyrannosaurs has changed so dramatically in the last 3 decades that the animals in our imaginations often bear almost no resemblance to the animals that the science describes. The revolution in our understanding began in earnest in the 1990s and has not stopped since. The first major revision was metabolic. For most of the 20th century, dinosaurs were assumed to be ectotherms, cold-blooded in the way that modern lizards and snakes are cold-blooded, reliant on external heat sources to warm their bodies to operating temperature, sluggish in the cool, active in the warm, sleeping through the night in most environments. This model explained the enormous sauropod sizes as a passive thermal strategy, large body mass retaining heat more effectively than small body mass, and it explained the supposed low activity levels of all but the smallest theropods. The movies reflected this assumption. The dinosaurs of Jurassic Park, for all their technical innovations, were still fundamentally cold-blooded in their behavior, ambush predators waiting for prey to come to them rather than actively pursuing across landscapes. The evidence that this model was wrong began accumulating in the 1970s with Robert Backer's groundbreaking re-evaluation of dinosaur physiology. And it has built steadily ever since into an overwhelming case for dinosaur endothermy, or at minimum, a form of metabolic regulation that produced body temperatures far higher than the surrounding environment. The evidence comes from multiple directions. Bone growth rates, examined through the technique of paleohistology, the microscopic study of bone tissue structure, show the rapid, sustained growth rates characteristic of endotherms rather than the slow, interrupted growth characteristic of ectotherms. Predator-to-prey ratios in Cretaceous fossil assemblages are consistent with endotherms rather than ectotherms. The posture and locomotor anatomy of bipedal theropods is consistent with active, sustained locomotion rather than the sprawling, energy-intensive gait of lizards, and the feathers, the protofeathers and down structures preserved in dozens of small theropod species from the Yixian Formation of China make no metabolic sense at all in an ectotherm, which has no need to retain body heat. Tyrannosaurus rex was warm-blooded. That is the scientific consensus now, though the details of exactly how it regulated its temperature and how high that temperature was remain under investigation. Some researchers argue for full avian-like endothermy, with body temperatures comparable to modern birds, around 40 degrees Celsius. Others argue for a form of mesothermy, intermediate between true ectothermy and true endothermy, perhaps generating heat through activity and retaining it through large body mass rather than through a continuously burning metabolic furnace. The truth is probably somewhere in this spectrum and may have varied across the Tyrannosaur family, with the smaller species more fully endothermic and the largest adults relying more on their mass for thermal inertia. What it means for our imagined future is significant. A warm-blooded animal can be active at night, can hunt in cold weather, can inhabit high latitudes, can sustain high activity levels for extended periods, can rear young with significant parental investment, warming them with its own body heat, the way modern birds brood their eggs. A warm-blooded tyrannosaur descendant in the cooler world of 20 or 40 million years post-survival is not limited to the warm, shallow floodplains of the original Cretaceous. It can go anywhere. It can adapt to any climate that its insulation and its physiology can handle. And 66 million years of evolution can produce extraordinary insulation. This is important because it means that tyrannosaurs, at the time of the extinction, were already practicing something that looks functionally like a multi-stage life history strategy, with different developmental phases adapted to different ecological roles. This kind of developmental flexibility is characteristic of cognitively sophisticated animals. It requires the capacity to learn different behaviors at different life stages. It requires social transmission of knowledge from experienced hunters to inexperienced ones. It requires a social structure complex enough to accommodate animals of very different size and ability within the same group without the larger individuals simply consuming the smaller ones. We have direct evidence of family relationships in tyrannosaurs from some remarkable finds. Fossil sites containing multiple tyrannosaur individuals of different sizes and ages suggest that at least sometimes, adults and subadults were associated, which is consistent with some form of family group structure. Whether these associations were long-lasting or merely opportunistic is difficult to determine from the fossil record, but the anatomical evidence for a complex developmental trajectory strongly implies a social context in which that trajectory was embedded. The third major revision concerns sensory biology. The olfactory bulbs of Tyrannosaurus rex, as I mentioned earlier, were enormous. A study published in 2019 by Kent Stevens and colleagues used computed tomography scanning of T. rex brain cases to produce detailed reconstructions of the brain itself, and the results were striking. The olfactory bulbs were among the largest, relative to total brain size, of any dinosaur studied. This implies a sense of smell of extraordinary acuity, almost certainly the primary sensory modality for long-range prey detection. Modern birds of prey, the raptors, are primarily visual hunters, but some vultures, particularly the turkey vulture, rely heavily on smell to detect carcasses from great distances. A tyrannosaur, hunting by smell, could have detected a large hadrosaur from several kilometers downwind, under the right atmospheric conditions, following the scent gradient with the focused precision of a modern scent hound. The visual system is equally interesting. The orbits of T-Rex face forward with the degree of binocular overlap comparable to, and by some estimates exceeding, that of modern hawks and eagles. The visual field of a hawk allows for extraordinary depth perception within the binocular zone, which is essential for judging the distance and speed of fast-moving prey. This level of visual acuity is not consistent with a slow, scavenging lifestyle. It is the sensory architecture of an active pursuit predator, an animal that needed to make rapid, accurate judgments about moving targets at varying distances. And the temporal lobes of the T-Rex brain, the regions associated in modern archosaurs with learning, memory, and behavioral flexibility, were proportionally larger than in some earlier tyrannosaurs, suggesting that the lineage was, in its final Cretaceous expression, already trending toward enhanced cognitive capacity. Evolution. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. Evolution does not restart from zero. It builds on what is there. The Tyrannosaur lineage, at the moment it was cut short by the impact, was already moving in a direction. That direction, extended over 66 million more years of selection pressure, is what our speculation tonight has been trying to follow. Now, to fully appreciate the world that the tyrannosaurs inhabited, and that their descendants would have inherited, we need to spend some time with the animals they hunted. Because the prey is not a passive backdrop to the predator's story. The prey is half the story. The predator evolves in response to the prey's defenses, and the prey's defenses evolve in response to the predator's innovations. And this reciprocal pressure is the engine that drives both lineages forward. The hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, were the dominant large herbivores of the Late Cretaceous in North America and Asia. By the end of the Cretaceous, they were among the most anatomically sophisticated herbivores that had ever evolved, with dental batteries of extraordinary complexity that allowed them to process tough vegetation more efficiently than any previous animal. A hadrosaur dental battery is not a single row of teeth. It is a stack of teeth, dozens of teeth compressed together into a single grinding surface, with new teeth continuously erupting beneath as old ones wear away. The result is a self-renewing cutting and grinding surface that could handle the tough stems and leaves of late Cretaceous vegetation with mechanical efficiency that would not be matched in the mammalian herbivores for millions of years after the extinction. This dental efficiency meant that hadrosaurs could exploit vegetation that other herbivores could not. They were ecological generalists in a certain sense, capable of processing a wide range of plant material, which made them resilient to the kinds of vegetation shifts that accompanied climatic change, and which made them enormously abundant. Hadrosaur bones are among the most common dinosaur fossils in the appropriate formations, and we have found evidence of hadrosaur herds in the fossil record that numbered in the thousands. These were not solitary animals, they were mass movement animals, animals of the open floodplains and delta margins, moving in the vast aggregations that are the characteristic response of prey animals to predation pressure. The crested hadrosaurs, the lambeosaurines, had elaborate hollow crests of bone that were connected to the nasal passages, and that functioned as resonating chambers for vocalizations. The anatomy of these crests has been studied carefully, and several research groups have produced reconstructions of the kinds of sounds they would have produced. The results consistently point to low-frequency resonance, sounds in the range of 100 to 400 Hz, rich and deep, and carrying. Think of the resonant bassoon quality of an elephant's rumble. Now imagine it larger and stranger, shaped by the specific geometry of a hadrosaur crest rather than an elephant's nasal passage, and you begin to approach the soundscape of a late Cretaceous floodplain. These were animals communicating. The complexity of their crest anatomy implies a complexity of communication that went beyond simple contact calls and alarm signals. Different crest shapes would have produced different resonant frequencies, and different resonant frequencies would have been distinguishable not just as louder or softer, but as different sounds, potentially carrying different meaning. Whether this constitutes anything like language in the human sense is impossible to say, but it constitutes something well beyond the simple honking and grunting that popular culture has assigned to these animals. It constitutes a rich acoustic communication system shaped by millions of years of selection in social, predator-rich environments. Against this background of increasingly sophisticated prey behavior, the Tyrannosaur lineage was being relentlessly selected for better sensory integration, better planning capacity, better hunting strategy. Every individual T-Rex that was a slightly better judge of hadrosaur behavior had a slight advantage over its less astute relatives. Every individual that was a slightly more effective communicator, capable of coordinating with another tyrannosaur to herd prey or to guard an escape route, had a slight advantage. And in the arithmetic of natural selection, slight advantages sustained over millions of generations produce dramatic change. We know this because we have watched it happen in our own lineage, and in the lineages of the animals around us. The remarkable cognitive flexibility of the great apes evolved in response to the complex social and foraging challenges of forest life in tropical Africa and Asia. The remarkable navigation ability of migratory birds evolved in response to the selection pressure of finding food sources thousands of kilometers away across featureless ocean. The remarkable problem-solving ability of corvids evolved in response to the challenges of a generalist lifestyle in variable environments with unpredictable food availability. In each case, a cognitive capacity that seems excessive for the immediate demands of the animal's life was shaped by the sustained pressure of selection over long periods of time. And in each case, the capacity once developed proved useful in ways that were not directly predicted by the original selection pressure. The Tyrannosaur brain, 66 million years from now in our imagined world, would have been shaped by this same process, not by a teleological drive toward human-like intelligence, but by the sustained pressure of an ecological arms race with prey that kept getting better at not being eaten, in a world that kept changing in ways that rewarded behavioral flexibility and learning. What that process would have produced, in its full detail, is beyond our ability to specify. But the direction is clear, and the direction is towards something more, not less. There is another dimension to this story that we have not yet fully explored, and is perhaps the most interesting dimension of all: the role of other predators. Because Tyrannosaurus rex was not the only predator in the late Cretaceous ecosystem. It was the apex predator, the largest and the most powerful. But beneath it in the ecological hierarchy, there were other theropods, smaller and faster and in many ways more innovative in their hunting strategies. The dromaeosaurids, the raptors, were by the late Cretaceous a diverse and successful family of small to medium theropods, feathered, highly active, equipped with the famous sickle claw on the second toe that served as a prey restraint rather than a slashing weapon, as functional analyses of the claw's geometry have shown. Velociraptor itself was turkey-sized, much smaller than the movies suggest, but its relatives ranged up to Utahraptor, which was as large as a polar bear, a genuinely formidable predator. The dromaeosaurids hunted in ways that the tyrannosaurs could not, pursuing prey into dense cover, climbing onto prey and using their weight and claws to control it, while they delivered killing bites, potentially cooperating in ways that the evidence from some trackway sites tentatively supports. In the alternate world of continued Mesozoic evolution, these smaller, more agile predators would have co-evolved with the tyrannosaurs in complex ecological relationships. Competition between predator species drives innovation in the same way that competition between predator and prey does. A tyrannosaur lineage competing for resources with an increasingly sophisticated dromaeosaurid lineage faces selection pressure to differentiate, to exploit prey and habitat that the smaller predators cannot access, to develop hunting strategies that leverage its specific advantages of size and sensory acuity. And the dromaeosaurids, competing with tyrannosaurs, face selection pressure to be faster and more agile, and more socially coordinated than the larger predator. Both lineages sharpen against each other. The dromaeosaurids in the alternate present, 66 million years further on, would be extraordinary animals. They were already, by the Late Cretaceous, the most bird-like of the non-avian dinosaurs, covered in feathers, with the kind of activity levels and metabolic rates that strongly suggest full endothermy. 66 million years of continued evolution in a world without the mammalian competitors that in our timeline rapidly diversified to fill every small vertebrate niche after the KPG event, would have given the dromaeosaurids free rein to expand into ecological roles that in our world are occupied by foxes, weasels, small cats, mongooses, and a dozen other small and medium carnivore groups. Some lineages would become more aerial, extending the partial flight capabilities that some late Cretaceous dromaeosaurids may already have possessed. Some would become burrowers. Some would become swimmers. The radiation of a successful lineage into available ecological space follows predictable patterns, and the dromaeosaurids in the alternate present would be a diverse and globally distributed family, occupying every temperate and tropical environment on the planet. And here is the interesting intersection. A cognitively sophisticated, socially complex dromaeosaurid lineage evolving alongside a cognitively sophisticated, socially complex tyrannosaur lineage, both under sustained selection pressure from each other and from their increasingly sophisticated prey, both in a world of changing climate and diversifying vegetation, produces a cognitive arms race that involves multiple lineages simultaneously. Intelligence and behavioral flexibility become an ecological premium that is being paid out to any lineage that can afford the metabolic investment. In a world like this, the evolution of genuinely advanced cognition, perhaps even multiple times in multiple lineages, begins to seem less improbable. The parallel with our own world's history of intelligence is instructive. Cetacean intelligence, in our world, evolved independently of primate intelligence under completely different ecological pressures, producing a different cognitive architecture that nonetheless shares certain deep features with our own: planning, complex communication, cultural transmission of behavior, individual recognition, tool use in some species. Corvid intelligence evolved independently of both, in a lineage so distantly related to mammals that the shared cognitive features almost certainly represent convergent evolution rather than shared ancestry. The octopus, more distantly related still, is another independent origin of sophisticated cognition. Intelligence appears to be something that evolution can find by multiple paths, given sufficient pressure and sufficient time. In a world where the late Cretaceous had continued for 66 million more years, with multiple lineages of large-brained, socially complex, warm-blooded archosaurs in sustained competition with each other, and with increasingly sophisticated herbivores, the emergence of one or more lineages exhibiting genuinely advanced cognition is not merely possible. It begins to seem, if not inevitable, at least highly probable. Not human cognition, because the path to human cognition required specific circumstances that would not have existed in this world, but something. Something with inner life and social meaning, and perhaps, in time, something approaching culture. Something that, if we could somehow go to that world and observe it, would make us sit in the grass at the edge of a forest and watch in silence, as we watch the great apes in the African forest today, with the quiet recognition that intelligence has found another form, that mind has blossomed in a place we did not expect to look. We will not get to go there. We live in the world the asteroid made, not the world it unmade. But the question is worth asking not because it has an answer we can reach, but because the asking of it changes the asker. It opens up the sense of deep time. It makes the history of life on this planet feel less like a predetermined narrative, moving toward its inevitable conclusion in us, and more like what it actually was: a vast and open-ended experiment, full of possibilities that were realized, and possibilities that were foreclosed by events indifferent to their magnitude. Some of the most beautiful experiments were the ones that the universe cut short. there is something important we have not yet spent enough time with. And that is the specific places where we know these animals, not as abstractions, not as evolutionary forces operating on geological timescales, but as specific animals found in specific rocks in specific places on the surface of this planet, dug out by specific people who spent careers learning to read the record that the Earth has kept. Because the speculation we have been engaging in tonight is only as good as its foundation, and the foundation is the fossil record itself, and the fossil record is one of the most remarkable things that exists. This accidental archive of ancient life preserved in stone, incomplete and fragmentary and subject to all the biases of preservation and sampling, but real, and getting richer every year as new sites are found and new techniques are applied to old specimens. The Hell Creek Formation is where most of what we know about the final chapter of the non-avian dinosaurs comes from. It extends across Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming, a sequence of river delta and floodplain deposits laid down in the final 3 million years of the Cretaceous, right up to the KPG boundary itself. The formation has been worked by paleontologists for over 120 years, beginning with Barnum Brown's expeditions for the American Museum of Natural History in the first decade of the 20th century. Brown found the first relatively complete Tyrannosaurus rex skeleton in 1902 in Montana, though it was several years before it was formally described, and his subsequent finds gave the world the iconic image of this animal that has shaped the popular imagination ever since. But the Hell Creek Formation keeps yielding new material, and each new discovery adds nuance to the picture. In 2013, Jack Horner and his colleagues described growth stages in T-Rex that showed the adolescent growth spurt in remarkable detail. In 2017, researchers described a remarkably complete T-Rex skull found by amateur paleontologist Larry Schaffer in North Dakota, which provided new data on the anatomy of the orbit and the brain case. The work goes on. The formation continues to give up its secrets. What the Hell Creek Formation tells us about the ecosystem is as valuable as what it tells us about individual species. The paleoecological picture that has emerged from decades of careful collection and analysis shows a rich and complex community, with multiple large herbivore species filling different dietary niches, multiple predator species filling different predatory niches, a diverse understory of small vertebrates and invertebrates, and a botanical community in transition, with fern and conifer associations giving way increasingly to angiosperm-dominated vegetation as you look at different parts of the formation. The ecosystem was dynamic, it was changing, and the animals in it were changing with it. The paleontologist Thomas Holtz, one of the foremost specialists in tyrannosaur biology, has pointed out something that is often underappreciated about the final Cretaceous ecosystems of North America. They were not typical Mesozoic ecosystems. They were, in some respects, unusual. The diversity of large theropods had declined in North America over the final 10 million years of the Cretaceous, with T-Rex and perhaps one or two closely related forms being the only large predators in the Hell Creek fauna. A departure from earlier Cretaceous communities where multiple large theropod species had coexisted. This taxonomic simplification at the apex predator level may reflect a genuine ecological specialization, with T-Rex so dominant and so effective that other large theropod lineages could not coexist with it in the same ecosystem. If this is correct, it has interesting implications for our imagined future. An ecosystem dominated by a single apex predator is, in one sense, vulnerable, because the entire large predator functional role rests on a single species. But it is also, in another sense, a sign of evolutionary success, because only an extraordinarily effective predator can exclude all competitors from its ecological role. T-Rex was, by the end of the Cretaceous, possibly the most effective large terrestrial predator that had ever evolved. the endpoint of a 90 million year lineage of theropod evolution that had been steadily optimizing for exactly this role. Its descendants, given the opportunity to continue, would have had that 90 million year optimization as their starting point. We should also spend some time with the geography of the alternate world in more detail, because geography shapes evolution in ways that are as important as any other factor. The distribution of continents, the presence or absence of sea barriers, the arrangement of mountain ranges that create rain shadows and climate gradients. All of these geographic factors influence which species can reach which places, and which populations become isolated from which others, and how genetic variation accumulates and is sorted by selection. In our world, the Cenozoic configuration of continents, with the isolation of Australia, the isolation of South America until relatively recently, the periodic connection and disconnection of North America and Asia across the Bering region, all shaped the distribution and evolution of the mammals that inherited the world. In the alternate world, the same tectonic processes produce roughly the same continental arrangements over roughly the same timescale. But the biological content of those continents, the lineages that are doing the evolving and speciating and radiating as the continents drift, is different. Australia in the alternate world is not an island continent full of marsupials that evolved in isolation from placental mammals. It is an island continent with its own lineages of small to medium dinosaurs, maniraptorans, and small ornithischians that have been evolving in isolation since the Cretaceous. The Australian dinosaur fauna of the alternate present, shaped by 66 million years of isolation on an island continent, is as strange and as specific as the Australian mammal fauna of our own world, full of forms that have no close parallels anywhere else, the product of long evolutionary experiment in an isolated laboratory. South America, similarly. In our world, South America was isolated from North America for most of the Cenozoic, and the result was a remarkable set of endemic mammal lineages: the native South American ungulates, the giant ground sloths, the glyptodonts, the terror birds, the extraordinary native predators that filled the large carnivore role before North American immigrants arrived across the Panamanian land bridge about 3 million years ago. In the alternate world, South America is similarly isolated for much of the post-Cretaceous period, and the result is a South American dinosaur fauna that is distinct from the North American or European or Asian faunas, with its own specific forms, its own evolutionary innovations, its own particular expressions of the general dinosaurian theme. The terror birds, incidentally, deserve a moment of attention even in this alternate world, because the terror birds of our world are themselves a remarkable example of what happens when non-dinosaurian archosaurs are given ecological space to evolve large predator body plans. The Forus racids were large, flightless, predatory birds that dominated parts of South America for much of the Cenozoic in our world, reaching heights of over 2 meters and weights of over 100 kilograms. They were apex predators in some South American ecosystems for tens of millions of years, running down prey with their powerful legs and killing it with blows from their massive beaks. They were, in a very real sense, doing what tyrannosaurs had done, occupying the large cursorial biped predator niche, only they were doing it as birds rather than as non-avian dinosaurs. In the alternate world, where the non-avian dinosaurs did not go extinct, the Forus racids would not have evolved, because the ecological space they filled was already occupied. But the fact that they evolved in our world, filling a tyrannosaur-like niche from a completely different starting point, is evidence that the ecological role of the large cursorial biped predator is one that evolution finds attractive and fills whenever it is available. The fossil record of the Cenozoic in our world is full of these convergent solutions, of evolution finding the same basic ecological answers from very different starting points. Mammals converging on the body plans of dinosaurs, birds converging on the body plans of large carnivorous dinosaurs, The fact that the same solutions keep being found is evidence that the solutions are robust, that they represent genuine fitness peaks in the adaptive landscape, that evolution keeps climbing them because they keep working. Now let us go back to the specific biology of Tyrannosaurus rex one more time, because there is a detail that we have not yet addressed, and that is central to the question of what its descendants might have become: the forelimbs. Those famous, seemingly useless, two-fingered arms, the subject of 1,000,000 jokes and 100 documentary sequences in which they are waved ineffectually while the animal struggles to lift something from the ground. The forelimbs of Tyrannosaurus rex were not vestigial in the strict biological sense. A vestigial, if you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. A vestigial structure is one that has become functionless through the atrophy of selection. A remnant of something that once served a purpose and now serves none. Retained by inertia rather than function. The examples in our own bodies, the coccyx, and the erector pili muscles and the palmaris longus muscle that some people have and others do not, are vestigial in this sense. But the forelimbs of T. rex, while greatly reduced from the forelimbs of earlier theropods, were not without function. They were heavily muscled relative to their size, with large muscle attachment surfaces on the reduced humerus, and they almost certainly served some function. Perhaps related to mating behavior, perhaps related to rising from a prone position, perhaps in some form of prey handling during feeding. They were not useless. They were just small. And small, in evolution, is not the same as on its way to nothing. Small can be the beginning of something different. Small can be the substrate on which selection operates in a new direction. If the environment begins to reward a function, that the small structure is capable of performing better than nothing, but worse than a larger structure would. In our imagined future, in certain tyrannosaur lineages that are hunting prey in dense cover, or that are beginning to manipulate objects in any context, the forelimbs might come under positive selection for slightly increased size or slightly improved motor control. Over millions of years, in a lineage where the forelimbs begin to provide a marginal but consistent fitness advantage, those limbs can grow longer and more dexterous, retaining the basic architecture of the theropod forelimb. 3 fingers reduced to 2 in the tyrannosaurs, but potentially re-expanding in some lineages if the selective pressure is consistently toward better manipulation. This is not speculation divorced from precedent. We have examples in our own world of structures that appeared to be on a downward trajectory reversing course when the selective landscape changed. The history of vertebrate limbs is full of gains and losses and reversals, of structures that became vestigial in one lineage, re-expanding in a related lineage that found a new use for them. The evolution of the hand itself, in the primate lineage, involved the refinement and extension of a forelimb structure that had been relatively unchanged through much of the early mammalian radiation. The specific grasping hand of the primates was not inevitable. It was one possible direction that a generalized mammalian forelimb could go, given the right selective context. And then there are the eyes. We have discussed the visual system of T. rex in terms of its forward-facing orientation and its depth perception. But there is another dimension of the visual system that matters for the cognitive future of the lineage, and that is color vision. Modern birds have tetrachromatic color vision, meaning they have 4 types of color receptors in the eye rather than the 3 that most mammals have, including humans. This tetrachromacy gives birds access to wavelengths of light, including ultraviolet that mammals cannot see, and it means that the visual world of a bird is richer in color information than the visual world of a mammal or human. Many features of bird plumage that appear uniform to human eyes are, in the ultraviolet, brilliantly patterned and highly variable between individuals, and it is in the ultraviolet dimension that much of the display and mate choice signaling in birds takes place. Tyrannosaurs were archosaurs, and the ancestral archosaur visual system was probably tetrachromatic, as the crocodilian and avian systems suggest. If T-Rex retained tetrachromacy, its visual world was richer than ours in the color dimension. Features of its own appearance and the appearance of other individuals that would have looked uniform to a human observer might have been highly variable and informationally rich in the ultraviolet. The feathers or skin patterns of T-Rex, in wavelengths we cannot see, might have been a communication system of considerable sophistication. And a lineage that communicates through visual signals of high complexity over long evolutionary time tends to develop the cognitive machinery for processing and interpreting that complexity, which is itself a form of intelligence. These are the layers that accumulate: warm-blooded physiology, allowing activity in cold climates and at night; sophisticated olfaction, providing long-range information about prey and other individuals; tetrachromatic vision with depth perception, providing rich and precise visual information about the immediate environment; acoustic communication in the low frequencies for long-range signaling; potential for social group structure with associated cognitive demands; and all of this compounding over 66 million years of continued evolution, driven by the sustained pressure of ecological arms races and climatic change, and the endless generative force of natural selection working on genetic variation. The result is not predictable in its specifics. Evolution never is. But the direction is clear, and the direction is toward more, not less. More complexity, more behavioral flexibility, more cognitive capacity, more richness of inner experience in whatever form inner experience takes in an archosaur descended from a late Cretaceous apex predator. More, over 66 million years, than we can fully specify. More, perhaps, than we can fully imagine. Let us pause for a moment in the middle of this imagined world and do something that paleontology actually does, which is to reconstruct a specific scene. Not a generic scene of predation, not the standard movie sequence of chase and catch, but a quieter scene. A scene that the fossil record, if we read it carefully, gives us reason to believe was actually part of the life of these animals. It is dawn in the Hell Creek floodplain, 66 million and 3 years before the present. 3 years before the asteroid arrives. The air is warm and humid. A mist is moving off the river, the wide, shallow, braided river that flows southward toward the shallow inland sea that still occupies much of the interior of the continent. The sky is lightening in the east, the clouds catching the first pink of sunrise, and in the trees along the river margin, birds, real birds, small feathered theropods that are already clearly on the avian side of the line, that will eventually separate birds from their dinosaurian relatives, are beginning to call. And at the edge of the tree line, in the transition zone between the forest and the open floodplain, something is standing still. Something very large. A Tyrannosaurus rex, a female by her size, well over 12 meters from nose to tail, standing with her head slightly lowered and her nostrils working. She is reading the air. The smell of the river, muddy and organic. The smell of the ferns along the bank, their particular vegetable chemistry. The smell of the hadrosaur herd that crossed here sometime in the last day or two. The accumulated olfactory record of hundreds of large animals passing through this specific corridor. And something else. Something that the female is attending to with great focus, tilting her head slightly, not moving, processing. There is something in the tree line behind her, smaller than her, much smaller. A juvenile, perhaps 2 years old, perhaps 80 kilograms, and barely taller than her knee, watching her with eyes that are proportionally enormous in its still small skull. The juvenile has been following her for 3 days, not consistently, not close, but following, learning the geography of her territory, learning the patterns of her movement, learning from the distance that is safe from her attention what a successful large predator does and where it goes and when. This is learning. This is social transmission of information across a generation, not through any deliberate act of teaching, but through proximity and observation, through the same mechanism by which young wolves learn from pack adults, and young corvids learn from flock members, and young chimpanzees learn by watching their mothers use tools. The juvenile tyrannosaur is not yet capable of taking the large hadrosaurs that the adult hunts. Its skull is not deep enough, its bite force not sufficient, its body not heavy enough to control prey of that size, but it is building a map. A behavioral map of how the landscape is used, where the prey moves, where the water is, where the cover is, where a successful hunter goes when it is hunting. This map will be useful in 5 years, when the juvenile has completed its adolescent growth spurt and is approaching adult size. The information being accumulated now through observation is an investment that will pay dividends later. That is learning. That is cognitive sophistication. Not abstract reasoning, not language, not technology, but the capacity to observe, to remember, to build internal models of the world that can guide future behavior. And that capacity, sustained and refined over 66 million years of selection pressure in environments that consistently rewarded it, is the seed from which everything else we have been imagining tonight grows. The female turns her head. The juvenile freezes. For a long moment, there is only the sound of the river and the birds in the trees. Then the female moves, stepping out of the tree line onto the open floodplain, moving with the measured efficiency of a large predator that has learned not to waste energy, reading the landscape ahead of her. And the juvenile, after a few cautious seconds, steps out of the trees and follows, at a safe distance, in the early morning light. Let us return to the alternate world one more time, and let us look at it in more detail, because the details matter. Because the details are where the real strangeness lives, the specific forms that 66 million years of uninterrupted dinosaur evolution might have taken not as abstract evolutionary trajectories, but as specific animals in specific landscapes, doing specific things. Think about the ocean. Because the extinction event did not only transform the terrestrial world, it also massively altered the marine world, killing the mosasaurs and most of the plesiosaurs and many of the marine invertebrates that filled the shallow seas. In our timeline, the marine ecological vacuum was filled by the diversification of teleost fishes, by the return of mammals to the sea in the form of whales and dolphins and seals, and by the radiation of cartilaginous fishes, the sharks and rays, into new niches and larger body sizes. In the alternate world, where the extinction event did not occur, the mosasaurs keep the sea. Mosasaurs, at the end of the Cretaceous, were already extraordinary animals. They were not dinosaurs technically, but were giant marine lizards, close relatives of modern monitor lizards and snakes, that had returned to the sea around 85 million years ago, and had diversified into dozens of species ranging in size from 2 meters to over 15 meters in length. They were fast, probably warm-blooded in at least some lineages, with paddle-like limbs and fish-like tail flukes that evolved convergently with ichthyosaurs and, much later in our world, with cetaceans. They were, by the Late Cretaceous, the apex predators of the global ocean, filling the role that killer whales and large sharks fill today. In the alternate world, the mosasaurs keep evolving. Over 66 million years, some lineages go larger, some go faster, some develop deeper diving capabilities, following prey into the mesopelagic zone the way sperm whales do in our world. Some become more socially complex, coordinating in groups to hunt schooling fish or to pursue larger prey. And some, in the coldest polar seas where food is abundant but temperatures are extreme and the challenges of thermoregulation are severe, develop ever more sophisticated forms of metabolic regulation and insulation, becoming more and more fully endothermic in the way that leatherback sea turtles in our world have developed, a limited form of endothermy for exactly the same reasons. The seas of the alternate present are not empty of marine mammals, because in this world there are no marine mammals. There never were. The mammalian lineage, denied the ecological opportunity of the KPG event, remained small and terrestrial and marginal, and never produced the terrestrial ancestors from which whales and seals would have descended. The oceans belong to the descendants of the marine reptiles, mosasaur descendants, plesiosaur descendants, if any survived, and most interestingly, the descendants of a lineage we have not yet discussed tonight, the marine birds. Birds entered the fossil record in the late Jurassic, and by the late Cretaceous they were already diverse and widespread. Some Cretaceous bird lineages were highly aquatic, adapted for diving and swimming, ancestral in various ways to the modern seabirds we know today, penguins and cormorants and auks. In the alternate world, these aquatic bird lineages keep evolving, and some of them, in the cold and food-rich polar seas, begin to commit more fully to a marine existence. Over tens of millions of years, some lineages lose the capacity for flight and gain the capacity for deep diving and prolonged underwater pursuit. They become, in effect, the penguins of the alternate world, though they evolved from different ancestors and under different ecological pressures than the penguins of our world. Convergent evolution at the level of major body plans. The sea rewards the same solutions, regardless of which lineage happens to be searching for them. Back on land, in the tropical forests of the alternate present, another dimension of the imagined world deserves attention. The forests themselves, the vegetation. Because plants evolved too, and 66 million more years of angiosperm evolution, in a world densely populated by large-bodied herbivores, would have produced botanical innovations that we can only begin to guess at. In our world, the relationship between flowering plants and their animal dispersers, pollinators, and seed spreaders has been one of the great co-evolutionary stories of the Cenozoic. The enormous diversity of fruit forms in the modern tropical forest reflects 66 million years of co-evolution between plants and the animals that eat their fruits and deposit their seeds elsewhere. In the alternate world, this co-evolution happens with different animals. The fruit-eating, seed-dispersing animals in the alternate tropical forest are not monkeys and bats and fruit-eating birds, or not primarily. They are small feathered dinosaurs, the descendants of the maniraptorans and small ornithopods, and various other small theropod and ornithischian lineages that filled the undergrowth of the Cretaceous forest. These animals have their own sensory profiles, their own preferences, their own behavioral patterns. The plants that succeed are the ones that attract these specific dispersers. The fruits that evolve are the ones that appeal to animals with vision systems tuned to specific wavelength ranges, with digestive systems that process seeds in specific ways, with ranging patterns and social behaviors that deposit seeds in specific microhabitats. The result is a tropical forest that is botanically diverse but different in its specific details from the tropical forests of our world. Different fruit architectures, different color signals, tuned to the color vision of dinosaurian dispersers rather than primate dispersers. Different chemical compositions with secondary compounds that deter the specific herbivores of this world rather than the ones of ours. The forest of the alternate present is green and wet and layered, with a canopy and an understory and a forest floor, all the same broad architecture as the forests we know. But the specific species and the specific ecological relationships that bind them together are alien in their particulars. And in those forests, the small maniraptorans of the alternate world have had 66 million years to diversify, uncontested by the mammalian insectivores and small rodents and small primates that in our world filled the corresponding niches. There are dozens of lineages, perhaps hundreds, ranging in body size from a few grams to a few kilograms, occupying every niche that small to medium-sized vertebrates can occupy in a forest environment. Insectivores and frugivores and seed-eaters and small vertebrate hunters and carrion specialists and parasite pickers. The ecological diversity of the small dinosaur fauna in the alternate tropical forest is at least as great as the ecological diversity of the small mammal and bird fauna in our own tropical forests, and possibly greater, because the starting point in terms of body plan diversity was already remarkable in the Late Cretaceous. Among these small dinosaurs of the alternate tropical forest, some are using their forelimbs in ways that the original small theropods were already beginning to explore. The hands of Maniraptoran dinosaurs were, by the Late Cretaceous, already well on the way toward the grasping ability that would eventually prove so important in the evolution of birds. Some lineages of small Maniraptorans in the alternate world have developed hands capable of true grasping, capable of manipulating objects with some precision. Not the fully opposable thumb grip of primate hands, which required a very specific evolutionary history that did not happen in this world, but a grasping grip nonetheless, sufficient for certain kinds of object manipulation, sufficient for turning objects over to investigate them, sufficient for removing shells or bark to access food underneath. Object manipulation is one of the precursors of tool use, not the sufficient condition, not the thing that guarantees that tool use will evolve, but the necessary physical substrate without which tool use is impossible. In our world, the great apes developed tool use on a foundation of hands that had been shaped over tens of millions of years of primate evolution in the trees. In the alternate world, some lineage of small, cognitively sophisticated, socially complex Maniraptoran forest dinosaur descended from ancestors that were already pushing toward grasping ability in the Late Cretaceous, might have arrived at something analogous by a different path, using a stick to extract insects from a crevice, using a stone to crack a seed pod, using a branch as a lever. We are deep in speculation now, necessarily so because we have moved beyond what the evidence can directly support, and into the realm of what the principles of evolutionary biology suggest is possible. But the speculation is disciplined. It is constrained by what we know about the starting conditions, the actual biology of late Cretaceous dinosaurs, by what we know about the general principles of evolution, and by what we know about convergent evolution in our own world, where tool use has arisen independently in primates and in corvids and in cetaceans and in several other lineages. The fact of convergent evolution is itself evidence that the developmental pathway to tool use is not impossibly narrow. It is a path that evolution has found multiple times, in multiple lineages, from multiple starting points. It is worth considering for a moment what the world of the alternate present would look like from above. From space, if you will, though no human would be there to see it. The continents in roughly their modern positions, because the tectonic forces shaping them are independent of biological events. North and South America connected by the same isthmus, or one very similar to it. Africa and Eurasia sharing a similar arrangement. Australia still an island continent, drifting northward toward Asia. The ice caps of the polar regions smaller or larger, depending on the specific point within the Milankovitch cycle. The same cycles that drove our own Pleistocene ice ages, because those orbital variations are entirely independent of what lives on the surface. From above, you would see the same distribution of climate zones, tropical forests at the equator, deserts in the subtropics, temperate forests and grasslands in the mid-latitudes, boreal forests and tundra in the high latitudes. The same atmospheric dynamics, the same ocean circulation, the same general pattern of weather systems and climate belts. Because the climate of a planet is shaped primarily by its orbital parameters and its atmospheric composition and its ocean continent distribution, not by what organisms happen to be living on it. But at ground level, the world is profoundly different from ours. Walking through the temperate forests of what would have been the American Midwest or the European continent in the alternate present, you would move through a landscape that feels both familiar and deeply strange. Trees, understory vegetation, a forest floor, birdsong, in the sense of the complex vocalizations of the small feathered dinosaurs that fill the trees. The sounds of insects, because insects survived the Cretaceous extinction almost intact in our timeline, and would have continued their own evolutionary diversification in the alternate world, probably along broadly similar lines, because insects co-evolved with plants more than with the large vertebrates. The smell of soil and vegetation and the particular organic chemistry of a living forest. And then, in the distance, something that would orient you very differently. A sound from deeper in the trees, low, resonant, a frequency that you would feel before you heard it with your ears. Moving through the trunk of the tree you happen to be leaning against, transmitted through the roots and the soil and the rock beneath. A sound that a large animal makes when it is communicating at distance, when it is saying something to another member of its species kilometers away. A sound with structure to it, with variation, with the quality, however alien, of something that is not random, something that is being made for a reason, by an animal that knows what the reason is. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. You would stop. You would be very still. And somewhere in the distance, the forest would answer. That is the world we have been imagining tonight. Not a world of pure horror and chaos, not the dinosaur world of the movies, all tooth and claw and screaming. A world of ecological complexity. A world of evolutionary richness. A world in which the intelligence that evolution can generate, given time and pressure and the right starting conditions, has had 66 million more years to express itself. A world that is not better than ours and not worse than ours. A world that is simply other. The road not taken, extended to its furthest possible point. We will never walk in that forest. It exists only in the logical implications of what the fossil record tells us, and what evolutionary biology predicts, and what the history of life on this planet has demonstrated is possible. But the value of imagining it, as precisely and as carefully as we can, is not nothing. The value is in what it does to our sense of the world we actually inhabit. Because when you understand how contingent the world we know actually is, when you genuinely feel the weight of all the worlds that might have been, you begin to see the present world differently. You begin to see it as one possibility among many, as the specific and non-inevitable outcome of a cascade of specific and non-inevitable events, each one of which was contingent, each one of which might have gone differently, and most of which went as they did for reasons that had nothing to do with any kind of purpose or direction. The asteroid hit. 3/4 of the species on the planet died. The mammals expanded. The primates emerged. The hominids arose. And here you are, in the dark, listening to a story about what might have been, thinking thoughts that Tyrannosaurus rex could not have thought, wondering about a world that you will never see, experiencing the specific, strange, beautiful capacity of a human mind for reaching backward into deep time and imagining its way towards something that does not exist and never will. That capacity is itself the product of deep time. It is the accumulated result of 6 million years of hominin evolution, of 3.5 billion years of biological evolution before that, of 4.5 billion years of planetary history before that, of 13.5 billion years of cosmic history before that. Every thought you have ever had is downstream of all of that history, made possible by the specific path through contingency that this particular universe happened to take. Made possible, among other things, by an asteroid that hit in a specific place on a specific morning 66 million years ago. The dinosaurs did not die so that we could live. The universe does not work that way, but we live because they died. And sitting with that, really sitting with it, is one of the more vertiginous experiences that deep time can produce in a mind that is willing to go there. It is late now. The dark is deep around you, and the present has that quality it sometimes has at the edge of sleep. Porous and slightly unreal. The boundary between now and not now becoming soft and permeable. This is a good time to let what we have been exploring settle. Not to summarize it, because some things should not be reduced to summary, but to let it rest in the mind the way sediment rests in still water, slowly finding its level, slowly revealing the shape of what has accumulated. We began with a bone, a femur in a glass case, longer than most people are tall, the relic of an animal that lived in a world so different from ours that it takes genuine effort to feel the connection. And we asked a simple question that turned out to be not simple at all. What if it had not ended? What if the asteroid had missed, and the world had kept running on the rails it was already on, and 66 million years of further evolution had had the chance to do what 66 million years of evolution does, which is everything, which is anything, which is things beyond predicting and beyond imagining with full precision? We followed the answer through deep time, through the actual biology of the animals as we know it, warm-blooded and feathered and more cognitively capable than the old image allows, through the ecological pressures of an arms race between predator and prey that was already sophisticated in the Late Cretaceous and that would have become more sophisticated still, generation by generation over millions of years, through the specific mechanisms by which intelligence grows in lineages where intelligence is rewarded, not as a goal, not as an endpoint, but as a tool, a means of surviving in an increasingly complex world of increasing behavioral sophistication on all sides. We imagined the world at 20 million years past the survival event, and at 66 million years. And we found not the Cretaceous preserved in amber, but a world as changed from its own past as our world is changed from the Late Cretaceous. A world with grasslands and seasonal climates and diversified fauna. A world in which the descendants of the Tyrannosaurs and the Hadrosaurs and the Dromaeosaurids have had the same span of time to become themselves, that the descendants of the Paleocene survivors had to become us. And then we stood at the edge of what the evidence and the principles can honestly support, and we looked at what lay beyond it, the question of whether something truly cognitively extraordinary might have emerged in that alternate world, and we said what the evidence honestly allows us to say, which is maybe, which is perhaps, which is that the conditions for it were better than they are often assumed to be, and that evolution has found intelligence multiple times in our own world from very different starting points, and that 66 million years is a very long time. The honesty of that uncertainty is itself a kind of gift, because the alternative, the confident assertion that of course the Tyrannosaur descendants would or would not have developed something remarkable, strips the question of the quality that makes it worth asking. The uncertainty is where the question lives, and living in a question, really inhabiting it, rather than rushing past it toward a comfortable answer, is one of the things that science, at its best, teaches us to do. Outside your window, or somewhere beyond the walls of wherever you are lying in the dark tonight, the world is continuing. The insects are calling, or the wind is moving, or the city is doing what cities do. Its low, steady hum of electricity and movement, and the millions of small human lives proceeding through their particular moments of waking and sleeping and dreaming and not dreaming. All of it downstream of deep time, all of it built on the specific path that the history of life on this planet happened to take. The asteroid hit, the mammals expanded, and here we are, on a Tuesday night or a Sunday morning or whatever specific moment it happens to be, with brains large enough to think about things that no longer exist and things that never came to be. The tyrannosaurs are gone. They are in the museums, in the careful work of the paleontologists who dig them from the rock and reconstruct them with growing precision, in the imaginations of children and adults who look at them and feel something that is not quite awe and not quite grief, but something in between. Some wordless response to the scale of what was lost. They are gone, but the going of them is not nothing. It is the ground on which we stand. It is the specific vacancy that the mammals rush to fill. It is, in the most direct possible sense, one of the reasons you are here. Let that be enough for tonight. Let the question settle. Let the deep time do what deep time does when you let it, which is to loosen the grip of the present moment very slightly, to remind you that the now is a thin layer on top of an almost incomprehensible depth, and that the depth is not threatening, is not something to turn away from, but is rather the context in which the now becomes more meaningful, not less. Every moment of conscious experience is an improbability of staggering proportions, the product of a chain of contingencies so long and so specific that if any link had been different, you would not be here to experience it. The femur in the glass case, the morning 66 million years ago that ended one world and began another. The small shrew-like creatures in their burrows, waiting for the dust to clear. The long patient work of evolution, building complexity from simplicity, building intelligence from reflex, building wonder from chemistry. All of it converging on this specific moment, this dark room, this quiet mind at the edge of sleep, thinking the thoughts that only creatures like us can think, about creatures like them, in the long and astonishing story of life on this planet. Sleep well. The world will still be here in the morning. And the bones are still in the ground, waiting to be found, each one a window into a world we can only see by sitting very still in the dark and listening for what the deep past is trying to say. Where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. See you on the next one.